There's a reason the Nazis didn't just invade countries, they also emptied museums, stripped walls, and invaded culture itself. Because art isn't just decoration, it's memory, identity, and power. And by stealing Europe's greatest masterpieces, they weren't just looting, they were trying to erase history and rewrite the story of a continent. From the grand museums of Paris to secret vaults beneath mountains, the Nazis built a shadow empire of stolen beauty. Some of it was destroyed, some changed hands. Some still hang silently on the walls of private homes and public galleries unclaimed. This is the story of how Hitler's regime orchestrated one of the largest art thefts in history, and how many of those stolen works are still missing today. It's a story full of mystery, injustice, and a long search to bring stolen art back where it belongs. Because in the end, some of these paintings may be in museums, some in private homes, and some forever hidden, never to be found. Surprise! Not AI, just Tony. A real dude with a voice that keeps fooling the internet. Smash, like, subscribe, and let's remind the bots who runs the show. Chapter 1. Why art was a target. To the Nazis, stealing art wasn't just about greed, it was about control. Art has always been more than just decoration. It reflects who we are, our stories, our beliefs, and collective memory. That's why, during World War II, the Nazis didn't only go after territory, they targeted culture. From cathedrals to private homes, they looted paintings, sculptures, rare manuscripts, and religious relics. What they couldn't use, they often destroyed. At the center of this campaign was Adolf Hitler himself, a failed artist who had once been rejected by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. That rejection didn't just humiliate him, it shaped his obsession. As he rose to power, Hitler imagined building the greatest museum in the world, the Führer Museum. This museum became one of the biggest in his hometown of Linz, Austria. He wanted it to be a monument to pure European culture, curated entirely on his terms. And to do that, he needed to steal it. But this wasn't just about personal ambition. It was propaganda. The Nazi regime pushed the belief that German culture was superior, and that everything else was either degenerate, corrupt, or undeserving of preservation. Jewish-owned art was especially targeted, seen as both a cultural threat and a financial prize. Entire collections were confiscated under false laws, with families forced to sign them away before being deported or killed. From the Louvre in Paris to remote Austrian castles, stolen art was cataloged and hidden. The Nazis operated by building a vast network of curators, soldiers, and archivists. As one document from Nazi archives put it, art belongs to the victors. But what happens when the victors are thieves and the stolen past refuses to stay buried? Chapter 2. The machine behind the theft. The Nazis didn't just steal art, they built an entire system to do it. One of the most chilling parts of this story is how organized it all was. At the center of this operation was the Eisenstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, mostly known by his initials ERR. He was a Nazi task force created solely to locate, seize, catalog, and redistribute art and cultural property from occupied territories, especially from Jewish families. They weren't looters in the dark of night. They had uniforms, paperwork, and a mission. Palaces, museums, and private homes were swept clean by trained teams. Every piece of art, including centuries-old Rembrandt and family portraits hanging in hallways, was logged, photographed, and packed. They had checklists, spreadsheets, and staff. This makes it the greatest art heist in history because it was bureaucratic. While Jewish families were being deported, stripped of their rights and names, their possessions were being sorted for value. Hermann Goering, one of Hitler's top men, personally walked through rooms of stolen artwork like a collector at an auction, selecting masterpieces for his private estate. Records show he visited looted depots over 20 times, hand-picking works by Van Gogh, Vermeer, and Degas as if they were his own. Elite Nazi curators, some of whom had once worked in Europe's most respected museums, now served the right. cataloging stolen works with academic precision. The goal wasn't just to take, it was to reassign cultural power. German museums were to be filled. Jewish and degenerate art was to be destroyed or forgotten. Archival images show rows of paintings stacked in crates, sculptures boxed and labeled like cargo, trains loaded with stolen culture disappearing into the mountains of Austria or the salt mines of Germany. But behind every item cataloged, there was a name, a signature on the back of a canvas, a photo in a family album, a wall once filled with memories. The Nazis had built the machine, but the true cost of that machine wasn't just measured in masterpieces stolen. It was measured in lives broken. Because while the crates rolled into tunnels and salt mines, the families they were taken from were being erased in silence. And the next chapter begins with the people who lost everything. Chapter 3. The Victims. The Nazis knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly who they were taking it from. Before they emptied museums, they emptied homes. Wealthy Jewish families in cities like Paris, Vienna, and Budapest were among the first targets. These families were art lovers, patrons, collectors, many with world-class works hanging in their salons and libraries, passed down through generations. To the Nazis, their culture was disposable, but their art was valuable. It started with intimidation. Families were pressured to sell their collections under duress, while being offered a fraction of their value, if anything at all. Others weren't even given the illusion of a transaction. Armed officers simply showed up and took everything: furniture, silver, books, and especially the paintings. Portraits of loved ones, landscapes by the masters, and works of faith and memory all vanished into trucks and crates, never to return. Among the most iconic losses, Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Blauer was stolen from the wealthy Bloch-Blauer family in Vienna, an art of beauty and status. It was renamed and displayed as if it had always belonged to the state. Vermeer's The Astronomer, a rare and prized piece, was taken from a Rothschild collection and nearly disappeared into Hitler's planned Führer Museum. Works by Degas, Chagall, and Pissarro were ripped from walls with their provenance erased. The Jewish identity of the owners was deliberately scrubbed away. The Nazis didn't want the world to remember who had once held these treasures, only that they now belonged to the Reich. They didn't just lose a home or a painting, they lost their story and their ancestors. Entire family histories were wiped out along with their collections. After the war, many survivors returned to find their homes empty, their records destroyed, and their art hanging in galleries under other names. Some pieces have been recovered, but thousands remain missing, scattered across countries, hidden in private collections, or sold on the black market. The question wasn't just what was stolen, but where it all went. It was wealth stolen in broad daylight, without a chance to rebuild. And while most of us will never face losses on that scale, the lesson remains. Building financial security should be accessible, not reserved for elites. That's why I want to highlight Ground Floor, a platform that lets everyday investors access high-yield, short-term real estate debt investments. Unlike platforms built only for the ultra-wealthy, Ground Floor is open to both accredited and non-accredited investors. That means you don't need $1 million portfolio to start growing real assets. You can invest in short-term real estate projects with as little as $10 and earn consistent returns. Check the link in the description if you're looking for smarter, more tangible ways to build real wealth, brick by brick. Chapter 4. The Hidden Caches. The scale of Nazi art theft was staggering, but even more staggering was how far these stolen treasures were scattered. Some resurfaced, many disappeared, and some have been hiding in plain sight. As World War II neared its end, the Allies discovered what the Nazis had tried to bury sometimes, deep in the Austrian salt mines of Altaussee, behind booby-trapped entrances and dynamite-wired tunnels. Allied forces uncovered thousands of priceless artworks, wrapped in cloth, stacked in crates, covered in dust, but miraculously intact. They included masterpieces by Michelangelo, Rembrandt, and Vermeer, all intended for Hitler's dream museum that never came to be. The recovery was led by a small, dedicated group known as the Monuments Men, who happens to be art historians, curators, and architects that later became soldiers, tasked with tracking down and rescuing Europe's cultural heritage. They searched Bavarian castles, secret tunnels, and abandoned trains, documenting and salvaging what they could. But for every piece they recovered, dozens more slipped through the high-level inspection. Some works were smuggled into private hands, traded in secret, or sold by dealers willing to ignore their bloody past. Others were likely destroyed as the Nazis retreated, erasing the evidence of their theft. And then there were the hidden collections that stayed secret for decades. In 2012, the art world was rocked by one of the most dramatic discoveries of the century. Over 1,000 looted artworks found in a modest Munich apartment belonging to Cornelius Gurlitt, the son of a Nazi-era art dealer. The Gurlitt collection included lost works by Picasso, Matisse, and Chagall, stored in silence for over 60 years behind ordinary walls and locked cabinets. Many of these works have been listed as missing or destroyed. Their reappearance exposed just how much of this history remains hidden and how much is still out there. There are black and white footage of salt mine vaults, crates labeled in multiple languages, photos of secret rooms behind bookcases and false walls, footage of modern-day homes where priceless paintings were discovered by accident, above a fireplace, behind an old door, or rolled into a tube in an attic. Where did it all go? The answer isn't simple. Some made it home, some never left Europe's shadows, and some, disturbingly, hang today on walls that remain silent about where the art came from and who it once belonged to. Chapter 5. The Fight for Justice. Even decades after the guns fell silent, the battle hasn't ended. It's just moved into courtrooms, auction houses, and museum boardrooms. The effort to return Nazi-looted art to its rightful owners or their descendants has been long, painful, and deeply emotional. For many families, it's not about the price of a painting. It's about the principle, the memory, and the fact that what was stolen was a piece of their history. These weren't just lawsuits. They were acts of remembrance of families refusing to be erased. One example is the story of Maria Altmann, an elderly Jewish woman living in Los Angeles who took on the Austrian government in a fight to reclaim 5 paintings by Gustav Klimt, including the famous portrait of Adele Blanche Bauer I, also known as the Woman in Gold. The painting had hung in Vienna's Belvedere Gallery for decades, celebrated as a national treasure. But it had been stolen from Altmann's family by the Nazis. Her fight went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. She won. And in 2006, after nearly 60 years, the painting was returned. Not just to her, but to its story. Altmann's case set a precedent, but it didn't solve everything. Many museums around the world, and even some of the most respected, have resisted returning looted works. Some argue there is no proof. Others say the art has become a part of national heritage. But to the heirs of Holocaust victims, these claims feel like a second theft of justice. While Klimt's Golden Woman returned home, Paris had already been stripped bare. In Paris, the Nazis didn't need to sneak in. They walked through the city's front doors. Between 1940 and 1944, as the swastika flew from the Eiffel Tower, Nazi forces treated the city like a private showroom. Palaces, galleries, and homes were emptied in broad daylight. The Louvre was protected, but not untouched. Though its famous pieces had been evacuated by curators ahead of time, the museum was still used as a central inspection point, where Nazi officials, including Goering, reviewed looted works from Jewish collections. This wasn't random theft. It was coordinated by ERR, the same organized looting force discussed earlier. They set up headquarters at the Jeu de Paume Museum, right next to the Louvre. There, confiscated masterpieces were processed like cargo. Paintings by Picasso, Matisse, and Cézanne were paraded past Nazi officers who selected their favorites for Hitler's proposed Führer Museum, or for Goring's estate. Photographs from the time show crates stacked floor to ceiling, labels in multiple languages, swastikas stamped across centuries of culture. Paris was bled of its heritage with boxes, and the irony of the whole situation is that France later resisted returning some of these works. Meanwhile, lawsuits continue to this day. Families armed with old photographs, faded receipts, and legal documents are challenging powerful institutions. In some cases, they win. In others, courts side with the museums. And now, the tension is high between cultural preservation and personal restitution. And as long as even one looted piece remains hanging in silence, the work of restitution isn't finished. Because returning art is not just about righting a wrong, it's about remembering who it was stolen from. Chapter 6. Who Knew and Stayed Silent? The truth didn't stay buried because it was lost. It stayed buried because some people wanted it that way. For decades after World War II, major institutions quietly held on to art they suspected or knew had been stolen by the Nazis. Museums from New York to London, Paris to Berlin displayed works with missing histories or vague ownership trails. Some pieces hung on their walls for generations, admired by millions, their past erased by a carefully vague label or a conveniently short provenance. Power doesn't just protect itself, it protects its possessions, even if they were stolen in war. Auction houses, too, have played a dark role. Some were accused of knowingly selling Nazi-looted works, using falsified documents or vague chains of ownership to pass stolen art from collector to collector. The stakes were enormous, with million-dollar paintings, high-profile buyers, and reputations that could shatter under the weight of one truth: this didn't belong to them. Governments weren't always eager to dig too deep either. Admitting a national museum housed looted art means facing lawsuits, headlines, and public backlash. For some officials, the quiet option was the easier one. Look the other way and let the story fade. But in the background of all this, the private collectors with their billionaires, heirs, and quiet buyers are hiding behind shell companies and offshore trusts. Some genuinely didn't know where their art came from. Others absolutely did and didn't care, because for many, ownership meant silence. As long as no one asked questions, there was nothing to answer. But silence is its own kind of theft, and for the families still searching and hoping, every closed door feels like history being stolen all over again. Chapter 7. The Art We May Never See Again. What happens to a painting when no one knows where it belongs? Because decades after the war ended, the trail of looted art is still unfinished. More than 600,000 artworks were stolen by the Nazis during World War II. An entire continent's cultural heartbeat ripped from walls, vaults, and homes. Some were recovered and many were returned, but over 100,000 are still missing. They're listed in global lost art databases with fragments of a vanished world, pieces by Van Gogh, Monet, and Raphael, with sketches by Klimt, entire collections broken apart and scattered. One still missing Degas drawing was once held by a Jewish family in Paris, last seen before they were deported. One time, a Pissarro painting disappeared from a gallery in the 1940s. Decades later, it surfaced in a private Swiss collection, only to vanish again after a legal challenge. These are more than missing masterpieces, and their disappearance have created gaps in a story with cultural and personal wounds that never healed. Some heirs died without ever knowing if their family's art survived. Others spent lifetimes in courtrooms trying to reclaim what was taken, not for the money, but for the memory. And yet, many of these works were never to be found. Some were destroyed in air raids. Others are hidden in private homes, hanging on walls behind gilded frames and carefully rewritten provenance, unknown to guests, or worse, ignored. Could one of the world's most famous paintings still be hanging in the wrong home? The uncomfortable answer is yes, because when art is stolen, it travels and changes hands, and in doing so, it becomes something else, a ghost, a lost story that shows up in auction listings, museum basements, and old family records, still waiting for answers. The war may be over, but for families still searching, the silence never ended. and neither did the loss. As the hunt for Nazi-looted masterpieces drifted into silence, another art mystery theft was orchestrated on the other side of the Atlantic. Unlike the forgotten corridors of war and exile, this next episode played out in a museum, under cameras in the center of Boston, and yet it left behind no clues, just empty frames and a $500 million mystery.